And news just coming in, the crucial nuclear suppliers group meeting has ended in Seoul, but there is a deadlock over the entry of non-NPT countries. Brazil has stressed on the criteria-based non-discriminatory process. The meeting is to continue even tomorrow morning. There are reports of an impasse at the NSG meeting at Seoul. They are discussing technical consequences of non-NPT countries entering the group. China, as of now, is not the only country opposing India's bid. There are conflicting reports that seem to indicate Brazil, Turkey, Austria, New Zealand continue to oppose India. And for the latest, I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Smita Sharma. A long day for you, Smita. Bring us the latest. We'll also go across to India Today's Anand Krishnan, who will join us from Beijing. But Smita, to you first, what's the latest?
Well, the meeting has just ended. It's been just a few minutes. It lasted for 3 hours, started at 9 in the evening, 3 hours of closed-door deliberations, which was a special meeting, in fact, convened by the heads of the NSG delegations. But before they could actually even discuss, specifically India, the discussions continued about the technical consequences about entry of non-NPT countries, and that definitely remained the bone of contention. The deadlock continues, the impasse continues. The meetings are expected to, in fact, restart tomorrow morning again. And what is perhaps worrisome for India, despite, in fact, some government sources making claims that it's only a consensus -1, that China is the only one which actually continues to oppose India in the moment. What we are learning from multiple sources here on the ground is that there are countries like Austria, Ireland, New Zealand, Turkey, and even Brazil, a country that actually Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar personally met with the delegates of whom today Brazil actually continues to say that there has to be a non-discriminatory, in fact, criteria-based procedure, something that almost sounds like what the Chinese, in fact, teams have been saying so far.
Okay. Now, government sources seem to indicate that the situation late at night in Seoul had come down to consensus -1. Take us through details of what the thinking in the government camp is.
Consensus -1, as I just mentioned, Gaurav, the government, in fact, is trying to make us believe that it's only China which is the one that still refuses to budge in, but all the other countries that India has reached out to, that they are now on board and they are all right with India's application. But there definitely seems to be a contradiction in what we are learning from the government's assurances so far and what, through the multiple sources that we have interacted here at the venue of the NSG plenary meeting. Because there, in fact, the sentiments around this, the nuclear non-proliferation treaty still seem to be very, very strong. And the fact that the very foundation of the NPT was following those nuclear, in fact, peaceful explosions of India in 1974.
Okay.
That these are the reasons that some of the members continue to, in fact, hold out to. And I can tell you that when the members were leaving after those 3 hours of meeting, they looked very exhausted, and it doesn't look like a resolution, in fact, is very nearby.
Okay. Stay with me for a moment. Anand Krishnan joins us from Beijing. Anand, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to President Xi Jinping in Tashkent, he said one thing. He said, make a fair assessment. He said, have an objective assessment on India's application and judge it on merit. We heard what the Indian side said. Do we have details of what the Chinese side said from the Chinese? Because we are picking up some bits of information from the Pakistani camp, where the Pakistani camp seems to indicate that China told them, we will not let Pakistan down.
Well, Gaurav, I think the Chinese aren't confirming what the Pakistanis said. It's very interesting that the Chinese readout of Xi's meeting with the Pakistani president is very different from the Pakistani readout. There's nothing in the Chinese readout which says that they've supported Pakistan actually. They still haven't released details of President Xi's meeting with Prime Minister Modi.
Okay.
Xi filters down to Beijing and to Seoul.
Okay.
They want this meeting first, agree on criteria, and if that happens, then they can discuss India's entry. And they also have been saying that they aren't alone, and there's still other countries backing them. We still have to wait and see whether that situation holds.
Okay, and this could change because the situation now, of course, everyone's saying don't be too optimistic. Smita, on ground, is the situation changing? Are the number of countries opposing India, is the number the same, 6, or is it now down to 4? Of course, with government sources saying it's only 1.
Our calculation says that barring perhaps South Africa, which was earlier, of course, in those list of clubs that was opposing, and Mexico, Switzerland, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi did go, the countries like Austria, Ireland, New Zealand, Turkey, these are countries that we saw were actually opposing even in 2008 when that special waiver was granted to India. But clearly, going back to your Pakistani statement, perhaps one needs to understand that as far as the Pakistani statements and readouts are concerned, not everything should be taken at face value because we have seen them do this even with the Indians. When the Indian-Pakistan foreign secretaries were meeting in New Delhi recently, even just 8 minutes into the meeting and they had their readouts ready, basically plugging their agenda which they wanted. But having said that, this essentially looks like it's not going to be an easy job because even if tomorrow the NSG decides that let's have another special round of meeting or another plenary meeting, if countries continue to oppose on the issue of not signing of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, then that definitely remains a big hurdle and something that India will have to think about how to really cross over.
Okay, so China continues to stonewall India's attempts at getting access to the nuclear high table. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi indulged in some straight talk at Tashkent, the mood in Seoul is far from clear. New Zealand, Brazil, Turkey, they've joined the list of naysayers against India. So they were a part of this initially also. India Today's Smita Sharma and Anand Krishnan with this report.
With Narendra Modi's diplomatic nuclear hard sell done, the Prime Minister faced his biggest challenge in the form of an obstinate China. At Tashkent, a mind game involving skilled statecraft was being played out, and Modi made his intention to the Chinese president clear.
Prime Minister Modi urged China to make a fair and objective assessment of India's application and judge it on its own merits. He said that China should contribute to the emerging consensus in Seoul.
While Modi minced no words, Beijing continued to iterate that the differences over India's entry to the nuclear high table would not affect bilateral ties.
Beijing also said that it did not think the NSG issue would affect ties with India because it was not a bilateral issue and it was something that the NSG should first resolve, with the members needing to agree criteria for the entry of non-NPT countries before considering India's case.
But Beijing's intentions were undercut at the world's nuclear stage in Seoul, and India's bid for NSG membership was listed for immediate discussion. China had made it clear in the run-up to the NSG meet that it would remain staunchly opposed to India's membership on the grounds that India is not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
It's the Modi government's diplomatic litmus test. Will the dragon give the green signal to India's NSG bid? Will the Modi-Xi Jinping meeting yield any favorable outcomes? And will Seoul finally pave the way for India's entry into the nuclear suppliers group? We will be tracking all the updates from Tashkent to Beijing to Seoul, only on India Today.
BCCI has... Okay, joining us now for the latest on this, Bharat Karnad, Strategic Affairs expert, Alka Acharya, she's Director and Senior Fellow of Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. B.S. Prakash, he's a former ambassador to Brazil, also former representative to the IAEA in Vienna. Welcome on the show, Anand Krishnan and Smita Prakash, still with me. Bharat Karnad, what do you make of what's happening at Seoul, sir?
Well, it's hardly surprising, considering, when our spokesman talked about fair and objective assessment, all fair and objective assessments, at least in international relations, are filtered through the lens of national interest. Now, it's not in China's national interest to get India into the NSG, simply because they want to keep hyphenating India and Pakistan. So I've never understood why there was this expectation that China could be turned on this issue. The other reason is just a few days back, Sartaj Aziz, the foreign policy advisor to the Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, said pointedly and categorically that Pakistan had succeeded in pretty much barriering India against entry into NSG. Now, it was not just China that it had got, presumably it had got assurances from, but also Turkey. We keep forgetting that Turkey is very much on Pakistan's side and has been, assuming Austria, Brazil and Ireland and New Zealand and so on, these countries sign on with the United States as and become part of the consensus.
Okay.
So there was never really any chance of India getting in, at least in this plenary at Seoul.
Okay. But does India have a chance to get in? How should India get China on board? Dr. Alka Acharya, what should India tell China? Because the impression is that China is trying to block India's entry, as Dr. Bharat Karnad was also saying. China is looking after its national interest and perhaps Pakistan's national interest.
Well, it's a bit late, I think, to think about what to say to China that will turn them around. I think we need to understand that there was really never anything substantially different that the Chinese either said through their official spokesman or in the media regularly. For the last 2 weeks we've been reading articles. Nothing suggested that there was any shift in the Chinese fundamental position that the technicality has to be first addressed so that you don't discriminate against other states. Of course, the Pakistan factor, I mean, nobody needs to keep on mentioning that is really the most dominant dimension in the Chinese mind when they think of regional power equations. But the fact is that now, when the issue has gone and you have information that there are other countries also, I think we must look at the issue squarely. There is a weight of international opinion. Can that international opinion work on China? The last time we are told that it was a personal kind of equation that worked between the Americans and the Chinese. Will it work this time? I mean, these are things which we need to now just speculate about, because we just have the night and then the meeting resumes. I think China's position would fundamentally remain the same.
Okay. Mr. Prakash, Brazil was seen as one country that would come around because, as Smita was also pointing out, Foreign Secretary had spoken to them. You've been former ambassador to Brazil. Were they always opposed to it? Because the indications were that, we could get them to come around.
I think we should recognize today, after these reports, that there are two different factors at work. The primary one, as we all know, is the geopolitical, and it concerns China and Pakistan. But let us not completely ignore the fact that there are countries like Austria, New Zealand and Brazil for whom it's also a question of criteria, of procedures. This is like a club, and a club has certain rules. It is not that these rules are of great sanctity, but they are functioned under a certain norms, a normative approach to it. So I think we should at least recognize the fact that there are people who have reservations about what they in fact are saying, that should we allow a non-NPT state, which is nevertheless a de facto nuclear weapon power, into this? Let us discuss it. And therefore, I think I don't see everything in terms of China and Pakistan. It is the major factor, no doubt, but there is also the other factor. So I would say that I think the time might come for us tomorrow, let's see how it goes, to take a deep breath. We have just celebrated the International Yoga Day. To take a deep breath and see whether we can't have a slightly more objective view of what's happening and how to come around it. It's not an existential issue in my view. It's not something like terrorism or territory.
No, in fact,
so let's not really take it to a pitch where it has to be done. I think we are veering around.
In fact, Mr. Karnad, does it kind of indicate that China is trying to block India's growth? Because the impression India has been giving all along is that this is a club we need to enter to have access to high-end nuclear technology. India by 2040 wants to move to non-fossil fuels. So that's the time, with 40% of non-fossil fuels, you would require nuclear energy, and China is trying to block that. Is that what China is appearing to be, a country that's blocking India's growth?
No, look, I think it's been very wrong of the government of India for about a decade and a half to give the impression that the NSG is the high table. It's nothing of the kind. And India doesn't really need the nuclear suppliers group to sell its, various technologies and goods and materials that we have indigenously developed. We have mastery over all the three fuel cycles, uranium, plutonium and thorium. We don't really need the NSG. The problem all along has been that India hasn't had the resources as other supplier countries have had to finance the export of power plants and set them up in third world developing countries where there's been great interest in the natural uranium fueled heavy water moderated reactors that India is specialized in. We have the greatest expertise in this natural uranium fueled reactors. Now, so we really don't need NSG. The NSG is useful only insofar as, for various reasons other than promoting India's technology base and export market, which we always have had, but we haven't really exploited for reasons I just mentioned. That most supplier countries also provide the finance for setting up power plants. Now, so we can do without NSG. The NSG is useful because we can now, again, it is not immediately necessary even for getting yellow cake, which is natural uranium, because that has now been, allowed since 2008 with the nuclear deal with the United States. So NSG is useful only as a legitimator, as an enabler. It's really not crucial to India's export and so on.
So it's a crucial enabler. It's a crucial enabler. Where China is blocking us.
It is not a crucial enabler, it's just an enabler.
No, it is something which
China, as I have said, blocks anything, but they'll stop doing so once they want to seek entry MTCR, where we'll have the veto as well on China's entry. So let's see how China behaves in the future, because we'll have the counter leverage and a counter pressure in terms of the MTCR.
So Smita, it's not over till it's over. We still have a day tomorrow. What can we expect tomorrow?
Well, frankly speaking, as I've been saying, that the feeling here has been that perhaps something which is much more realistic is that they decide that, in near future, we try and work towards accommodating India, because it's not just China, as I was mentioning, these are other countries too. So tomorrow the deliberations start early in the morning, because noon onwards, in fact, the NSG delegates of 48 member countries, they are supposed to actually make a trip to the demilitarized zone, and so it's the morning 3-4 hours that we will see, in fact, heavy deliberations on. We'll have to see what the other countries, like in the plenary session today, it was countries like Japan that actually brought up India's issue and supported India's cause. So what is the kind of support that these countries can actually come up with, and arguments that they can come up with tomorrow? And personally, the kind of heavy weightlifting that George Bush did maybe in 2008, while the American President Barack Obama has been making public statements, vocally of course supporting India, but is he also willing to do some amount of the weightlifting towards the last leg of the process? Maybe some of the other world leaders, is that something that India will be able to pull through? It will depend on a host of these issues at the moment.
So is NSG, Anand, the latest battleground India and China?
Well, Gaurav, they've been sticking to one message for the last 5 days, is that they don't want it to become a China-India issue, which is why they've been pointing to the 4-5 other countries that are also expressing concerns on India's entry, which is why which has led to the suggestion in some quarters that if it was 47 versus 1, that China would be very reluctant to make it an India-China issue. So that's why the onus for India has been to try and get those other countries round to its point of view. And Beijing's other argument, which has been making, is about criteria. So again, the other onus is on trying to arrive at criteria today and early morning tomorrow, and then bring up the second round of talks, which would be on India's specific case.
Because the impression all along, Alka Acharya, has been that other countries seem to be coming around. China was pressing them to hold out. Turkey and China being closer to Pakistan were holding out. Is there then, last minute weightlifting that we saw, heavy lifting that we saw like in 2008? In your opinion, you study China well. Hu Jintao very different, from Xi Jinping very different from Hu Jintao. So do you see that last minute heavy lifting have any impact, or now it's too late?
Well, I think, at this point it's very, very difficult to speculate. I mean, whatever we say is going to be completely throwing, all sorts of shots into the air. I think we need to focus on 2 or 3 things. The first thing, and which is very significant in my view, that these are not black and white issues, and that if we are trying to put countries into camps and they are taking simple decisions for and against, that's not the case. I think there are a whole lot of factors which go into what kind of stand you take on the issue of non-proliferation, and we've seen countries who are our friends take different positions against us, sometimes for us. So these are issues which are not decided just on the spur of the moment or because you are friends or you're not friends. Number 2, this international consensus that we saw last time around, and China was clearly the only one, is not the case. This time, as you can see, there are more than one country that is standing and taking a certain kind of a position. This afternoon, the Mexican ambassador also spoke about how India's inclusion would mean that we would have to also then look at Pakistan. So countries are clear what India's inclusion into this will mean. And I think the final thing is that we need to see how the Chinese are really operating in this. I think there has been a little less than adequate understanding of how the Chinese have positioned themselves in this debate right from the beginning. We thought that the Pakistani factor was the only thing, but I think that the technicality that the Chinese are talking about is striking a chord among more than one country. And I think we need to work on it. We just can't make an argument that we are the angels or we are merit, consider us on our merits. I think that is not how international institutions ought to work. Ideally, there should be criteria, and India should push for criteria which will make its case stronger.
Okay. But, Bharat Karnad, even if India were to be considered for NSG, that automatically would not be an enabler for Pakistan for several reasons. And most important, if not, is the fact that India's non-proliferation record is outstanding and Pakistan's record is rather dismal.
Yeah, absolutely. The point, though, is Pakistan's patron, China, is at the center of the rogue nuclear triad.
Yes.
Including North Korea and Pakistan.
And that is
so,
China talking about, processes is bizarre, sir.
Yeah, precisely. And this is the great irony of it, that the greatest proliferator is talking about India having to sign the NPT. Now, the problem is China is changing the rules of the game. Until now, the entry into the nuclear suppliers group was based on guidelines. Yes. Now they are saying, the Beijing Zhongnanhai Foreign Office complex is saying they want a criteria-based entry. Now that's changing the rules of the game. However you look at it, whatever criteria you put forward, the fact is you'll have to have the proliferation record up and front and center. Now, if you do have it front and center, what happens to China's record, which is really behind China and Pakistan's proliferation?
Exactly.
And proliferation to North Korea. So you see,
who's China to pontificate
China
the way
in a very bad light, and that's the reason it has sought to escape it.
Yes. Who's China to pontificate to us?
That particular limelight. No, yes, but you see, that's why it's trying to have, hide behind Brazil and Turkey and New Zealand and so on, because it comes out, its record is stark, and it'll come out as silly and ironic for China to maintain its position.
And this is something I'm sure India should be saying in as many words. Is it possible to get Brazil around? Is it possible to get other countries around him? Because this sounds so hypocritical.
No,
they're sitting on the high table with a country like China and they're lecturing to India.
No, it's certainly possible, but we must keep in mind that there is a big difference between the waiver that we got in 2008,
yes,
because that was a specific case of India, and that was regarding technology transfers to India, and given our record, we had impeccable credentials and it was accepted. But this time, it is changing the rules of a club, changing the norms of a club. So I think we have tried for an outcome, but if the outcome is going to get delayed, it is because we are not dealing with a specific issue of waiver, but we are dealing with the issue of membership. So let's see what happens tomorrow. But I don't think that it is necessary for us to see it completely, as Dr. Alka Acharya said, in black and white terms as a win or loss, because this kind of diplomacy can be incremental, is an act of persuasion, and certainly directly responding to your question, Savant, we can persuade many people. We can persuade China too.
Yes.
But it is not necessary for that persuasion to really fructify in 1 day, in 2 days. We have been at it for some time and we have come to this stage. So I think let's be realistic and see what happens tomorrow.
Okay, it's not over till it's over, and perhaps well begun is half done. So let's see what happens tomorrow. Smita Sharma will continue to give us the latest from Seoul. I would like to thank all my guests for being a part of this discussion. We'll track this story. There's breaking news that's coming in from Germany.